I call to order the July 5th City of New Bern Planning and Zoning Board meeting. Seth, can we get a roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Brad Jefferson.
Here.
Rusty Ingram.
Here.
Raymond Layton.
Here.
Margie Dunn.
Here.
Pat Doherty. Sonny Aluzo.
Here.
Kyle Deering. Marshall Ballard. We have 5. We have a quorum.
All right, thank you, Seth.
Thank you.
Item number 2, approval of minutes. It's the pleasure of the board. Should we go through these one at a time, or we got questions? Okay.
God, I do have a correction, or I think it's a correction. On June 6th, line 118, do you have your Seth? I didn't print that one line or that page.
Which set is that, Margie?
The last one, the June 6th,
Oh, okay.
line 118. Should have printed it. There's a... No, I wrote it to line 118.
Yeah,
I'd have to
yeah,
see.
this sentence
That last sentence, you see it?
doesn't make much sense.
Yes.
Okay. All right, we'll correct that.
Okay, so we'll approve that, all the others except for that? Or
Sure.
we'll keep it with the
Correction.
correction?
I think you can do it as a batch.
Yeah, so I move we approve the minutes from January 5th, 2021, April 6th, 2021, May 4th, 2021, and May 2nd, 2023.
And June 6, 2023 with
Yeah,
corrections?
with, as it would be amended.
Yeah.
I'll second that.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion passes.
Motion carries.
Item number 3, new business. Item A, Athens Acres Phase 2 final plan. Seth.
Thank you, sir. The applicant, Phoenix Derby Park LLC. Again, the project is Athens Acres Phase 2. This is formerly known as Derby Park Phase 7. The site is located off Medina Spirit Street, which is located off of, or at the terminus of Elizabeth Street. Existing zoning is R10A, and this particular site is 10.04 acres, approximately. 23 lots altogether, a little over 4 acres open space, a little over an acre of dedicated right-of-way, and City of New Bern utilities are utilized on site. We've got the area here, as you can see, where Elizabeth Avenue comes to an end. And we've got the 23-lot final plat before you. The project received general plan approval from the City of New Bern Planning and Zoning Board on August 5th, 2021. Staff reviewed the proposed subdivision and finds that all the technical and legal requirements for final subdivision plan approval have been satisfied. The Director of Public Works has confirmed that the standing letter of credit is sufficient to cover the outstanding improvements. Therefore, staff has no objection to final subdivision plan approval of Athens Acres Phase 2. The applicant is here with us tonight, John Thomas, representing the subdivision, if there's any questions for him.
All right, thank you, Seth. What's the pleasure of the board?
Has city staff completed their inspections of the infrastructure as installed, found everything to be acceptable?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Is this one that we're going to need the consistency worksheet?
No, sir.
No, okay. All right. Just us. We're going to figure this all out together. Then what is the pleasure of the board?
Make a motion, accept it.
Okay, I have a motion to accept.
Second.
I have a second. Any discussion? All right, seeing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
Do you have a question for John? Do you know who the builder's going to be? Do you know who the builder will be? Builder? Adams?
Adams Homes,
Okay,
we sell to buy the first part up there.
that's what I heard.
I think they have a contract to buy them all over the period of time.
Yeah. Okay, cool, thank you.
Y'all think, have a good one.
Thanks,
All
John.
right.
All righty, moving on to item 3B, land use ordinance text amendments. Seth?
Thank you, sir. So this item here, we have sections 15, 416, and sections 15, 417. These sections were inadvertently deleted from the ordinance during some updates back in December of 2022. These are part of the HPC code. HPC voted unanimously to recommend approval to adopt the changes of section 15, 416 as prepared by the city attorney. You've got copies of that in your packet. And to reinstate 15, 417 as it was prior to December 22. So no amendments to 417. Staff recommends the Planning and Zoning Board vote to recommend that the Board of Aldermen adopt the text amendments as submitted. Those would require the consistency statement.
Okay. All right, so seeing that this is going to require the consistency statement, board have any discussion on this item? Perhaps we get some guidance on our first use of our checklist form, or does somebody want to make a motion without it?
I think it's the map amendment, this consistency statement will be more useful than on the text amendment. I think it would be fair to make the statement that the text amendment is found to be consistent with our future land use plan. That will suffice for this.
Okay.
I make the motion, we accept the amendment.
The text amendment
Mm-hmm.
as submitted.
As submitted.
I'll
And-
second that.
And is the motion to
Oh, I
accept
have
the
to.
text amendment and also to find that the proposed language is consistent with the land use plans?
So shall I restate my motion?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I make the motion that the proposed amendment and presented documentation are consistent with the stated goals, the expressed intent, and the 2022 land use plan update and 2010 land use plan. And that the proposed amendment is reasonable and in the public interest.
Just like that.
How about that?
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second.
Wow, thanks for the support
You
tonight.
did a great
Not
job.
have said it any better. I'm so proud.
Well, thankfully, the chairman pointed out the bottom part of the statement for me. So.
Quietly, but thank you.
So I have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Item number 3C, land use ordinance text amendment. Seth?
Yes, sir, and this one's even more simple. Section 15-423D. Quite simply, staff notice a typo where it says what is currently in print is 170D-406. There is no 170. Staff recommends that Planning and Zoning Board vote to recommend that the Board of Aldermen adopt the text amendment to change section 15-423D to read as 160D-406.
Now, was the original text approved by the Planning and Zoning Board and then taken to the Board of Aldermen for approval first?
Originally, yes.
Okay.
This is just during a reprint.
So this is
somebody
something
keyed a
we
seven.
already approved as a
Yes, sir.
board, but there was a typo, so now we're just fixing the typo.
Yes, sir.
Correct.
Pleasure of the board.
Do we need the consistency statement for this? Oh,
You
great.
did such a great job, go ahead.
I think you only have to say maybe the expressed intent, Or does it need all three of those?
I would check all of the boxes.
Check all the boxes every time? Okay, perfect.
All right, I'll make a motion that the proposed amendment and presented documentation are consistent with the stated goals, the expressed intent, and the 2022 Land Use Plan Update and 2010 Land Use Plan, and that the proposed amendment is reasonable and in the public interest.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Item number D, discussion item, parking. Seth?
Yes, sir. Last month, we were discussing Section 15-343E, which explains the central retail core.
Sounds on.
Ma'am?
Sounds on.
Oh, great.
Yep. All right.
We've got the map that we discussed before you here.
All right. So I think what they're asking us is to provide a little guidance on whether or not we, maybe next meeting, vote in support of moving these lines, or perhaps we want to delay to look at this when we go through our entire code of ordinances. I am in favor of however the board would like to do that. I'll open it up for discussion.
All right, so my first question is, what do we think the timeline is for reviewing, start to finish, the entire code of ordinances? I'm assuming that's not going to be a short process.
Optimistically, 18 months.
Yeah, so
Madam Director,
not a
would you like
short
to come to the
process.
microphone?
So then my question is it beneficial from the standpoint of the board and staff to deal with this map change in advance of, and then the update process can merely be confirming that? That's,
If you feel it would be beneficial, I would like to hear that conversation. I'm
that's-
happy to take it and advocate for what the board's recommending to the Board of Aldermen in a public hearing. It is before us because it does come up periodically as an issue. So if it is the will of the board to move this on to be an action agenda for recommendation at our next Planning and Zoning Board meeting, we can take that vote, and I will present that vote to the Board of Aldermen in a public hearing for their conversation. And again, even if I can present this to them, that we discussed this, here are the discussion points that came up, and I will explain that what the vote was, whether that you all recommended it affirmatively or you recommended not doing this, but we had the conversation, so we're moving it forward. Either way would be fine.
so in short, and following on with our discussion from our last meeting, I would be in favor of this map change and redrawing this, this map, the boundary. And we had some
I think we should-
lively discussion
I
last
think-
month, but
I think we should move somehow and not wait 18 months.
Okay, well,
Yep.
what we will do, if that's what we would, the consensus of the group is, staff will write a more detailed staff report for conversation the next time, and we will host that vote, and we will move it forward for the decision makers to consider.
Is it fair for us to submit questions to staff between now and the next meeting as to what some of our concerns might be or what some of the questions are, so that could be part of the report?
You are
Or we could
always
talk about
welcome
it
to
right
do
now.
that, yeah.
What's the why? Why do it?
Because our zoning ordinance parking standards are designed for a new building, a new business to go in a new building, not to accommodate a new business going into a historic building with very limited parking.
right. So anytime there's a change of use, it triggers reviewing the parking, and in a lot of cases during due diligence, it simply tells a prospective building owner or a business owner that might want to buy a piece of property that, well, change of use is going to rule out that piece of property because I can't meet the parking requirements. And
Well-
so then they look elsewhere.
But it's not necessarily it rules it out. It means they can still apply for a variance. It doesn't mean automatically, right, that it rules it out.
Very often it does, because in the instance of a variance, there are very strict criteria that
Right.
must be satisfied. And up until this point, I haven't seen anyone be able to satisfy those variance criteria.
Fair point.
Have we had anyone to come into one of these old buildings and said, I want to do this, but because of the parking requirements, I cannot?
Yes,
How many times?
I would have to, I don't know if staff keeps track of all of the denials that they make. Many of those conversations are anecdotal.
Right.
Very many times, there's no application that's presented, they just call and ask questions if I'm not speaking out of turn. So that data would be very difficult to aggregate.
So, and I would,
You couldn't honestly say a lot.
well, I would suggest that it, more often than not, never gets to that point, because as a part of due diligence, for instance, prospective business owner or someone that would like to buy a piece of property or buy a building downtown, and change the use for whatever, comes to our office and says, hey, we'd like to hire you to help us with due diligence. So, we look at flood elevations. We look at a whole gamut of things. Ordinance criteria being one of them, parking is one of them. And so, I'm just going to go right down the list and say, okay, you've got a problem when you change this use. You don't have enough parking on your property to satisfy this parking requirement. And if you're not inside that current yellow box, you can't utilize off-site parking or on-street parking to check part of those numbers. It's just not available to you as an option. And so, that likely that business owner right then says, okay, well, that piece of property's out, let's look somewhere else. And so it never gets to staff for discussion.
Does anyone know why the original yellow area was chosen and not the rest? Do you have any idea? I mean, I know you weren't here to do it, but does anybody have any idea why that
I
happened?
would imagine it was because it was the central business district at that time, and all these areas in red were most likely more residential than they are now.
I mean, didn't we discuss this way back?
We discussed it last month.
Didn't we discuss this parking and make changes here? And that's why
No, not for that. We discussed parking with blinders on as it relates to short-term rentals. And we talked about this a little bit, and this area, it's with some what if scenarios, but not specific to as a whole for parking.
If this change, it really is not going to change the amount of parking that people have now, right?
It doesn't change the number of spaces that are downtown. It doesn't change that.
It could change the spaces that they have on the property, because now they're not going to be required to keep those spaces on the property. So I have two issues with this. One is, at least from the conversation we had last time, I don't think we should eliminate any parking spaces in the downtown area, because if you do that, and we've talked about this, right, we have a walking problem, we don't have a parking problem in the city of New Bern. So if you get rid of some of the parking spaces in these red areas, you're going to push people into the residential areas to park closer to like the edges of the red area. So eliminating parking spaces is one, and then secondly, let me finish. The second one is putting a business that requires even more parking and now saying, oh, you don't need to worry about parking spaces, and where are all those people going to park? So we're addressing allowing all these businesses to not have the parking requirements, but we're not addressing the parking problem. That's the problem I have with this.
Real quick, sorry. Is that true? What he's saying, that, say, these Airbnb, the bed and breakfasts down here wouldn't then, if we made this change, they wouldn't be required to have the
Depends on
parking
the
space?
language that's
That
written.
depends on the language that you all direct staff to bring back to you.
Fair
So
enough.
you could give direction to staff to bring you language that says that it spans the boundary that exists before you on the screen, except or provided that there's no reduction in off-street parking. That is one option that can be considered.
Right. Understood. So
So
that's
if it had-
one thing.
Right, so if we had,
But yeah, I figured that was probably the case.
okay, I'm just
No, it's a great question. It's absolutely a great question.
But with the parking that they have downtown, where you have public parking, which is on the streets, you're limited on how long you can stay there.
For the on-street parking, yes. However, in the city-owned lots, I do not believe that there's any type of time restriction.
Correct.
Because they're rented out.
So I'm going to open a business, but I think I'm going to need at least 25 parking spots, but we've eliminated and made this request, so now I can park anywhere else, or my customers can go wherever and park in anybody's spots. Yes? No?
Well,
For the
when you say
duration of
anybody's
the-
spots,
Well, you can't park in rented spots.
Well, I
You
understand that.
can park in the yellow lot or the red lot or the black lot, just like anybody else could.
But if you parked on the street, it would only be for 2 hours.
Yeah, it would only be for 2
And the
hours.
problem I have is if you look at the area north of the red zone, that's all residential, just happens to be where I live. And there is no requirement, there is no limit, time limit on how, so people could just park there.
yeah, and on street downtown, it's 7 to 5 is the 2 hour limit. After
Right,
5,
after
the 2
5.
hour limit goes away.
Makes
Correct.
sense. That's right. Makes sense.
And likewise, in particular with the lot that's beside Morgan's, a lot of the space, that's a leased lot, so a lot of the spaces there are leased.
Right.
Most of the lease spaces, there are some 24-hour lease spaces, but most of them are 7 to 5. So after 5, they're again available for someone coming down to go to the restaurant or whatever.
Right.
And they're not, I mean, that's when the enforcement goes away, and that's why those
Yeah,
requirements
but
goes
if
away.
my business, people are going to be there 9 to 5, doing whatever the business I open up, so they're,
Which likely no different from any other business that's in the yellow box that we see now.
Right.
Right, and so it's the
That's
same,
my question.
same requirements.
Right now, within the yellow area, if you want to open up a new business in an existing building, there's no parking requirement.
That's right. So the question is,
So-
why are we treating the people in the red hatch differently?
I'm having trouble with the logic.
Yeah.
That's why I'm wondering why it was ever in the first place.
Just a line that was drawn, and we're talking about redrawing the line.
Yeah.
You know, it was likely logical at the time when it was done,
I
and
hope.
so I think what we are,
One can only hope.
well, what we're discussing now is that it may be logical to move that line,
And Mr.
redraw the
Abruzzo,
boundary.
Unfortunately, I don't have the procedural history. I think the last time this section was amended was many, many decades ago.
Yeah, it was a long time
I
ago.
will add that if this body is inclined to do nothing and no movement is made to these lines, then the collateral consequences of that choice may be no new uses in downtown, empty businesses or empty buildings, because we're unable to create more dirt downtown, and I don't think it's the will of the Board of Aldermen, that is, to demolish historic buildings to create parking spaces.
Right.
So because of the unique situations of having a historic downtown that has expanded throughout the years, growth is a good thing, that growth is now putting us in a position where I think we need to scratch our heads and think very critically.
I'm curious, any business owner that's down there now, that we're going to say there'd be no parking requirements, would that affect them and their business?
I could only assume in a good way.
Why would it be a good way?
They'd become more conforming.
Right?
And those individuals will have an opportunity to come to the Board of Aldermen during the public hearing and express their, what if any impact it would have to their business.
Right.
Now, the yellow area, is there any requirement in the yellow area that existing parking spaces cannot be removed or demolished?
Not that I'm
Not
aware
that
of.
I'm aware of, no, sir.
There's not a lot of land in there.
No, no. And most of those lots are
But we can
private.
fix that, or we can change that.
We can
as a
change
part of
that
what we're doing.
language.
Yeah,
Understood.
or part of what we're talking about doing.
Right.
So we had mentioned one option to consider was throwing in some language that said, if you want to remove parking that exists on whatever date this is approved, then the only way to do that is to get a special use permit through the Board of Adjustment.
Right.
And that is probably the easiest way to accommodate our keeping the parking that we have, because you would take a really deep dive look through that special use permit process on whether or not that was appropriate. And I would probably suggest if we redraw that line, we left the short-term rental parking standards to apply, and that we did throw in that language on the special use permit to maintain what we have.
Yep.
Agree.
Now, is there any?
That was on my list, the short-term rentals, that we probably ought to maintain that.
Yes, and that's
simply
been
because-
recently discussed. I think people are comfortable with it. Nobody wants to change that, so we just call that out in the words.
Yep.
Is there any thought to protecting the parking in the residential areas on the north and the west side of that downtown area?
Explain to me what you mean by protecting.
Permit parking,
I
limited
think
parking
that's
in
out
any
of our pay
way?
grade on permitting parking. I'll let, Jamie, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's been any discussion about any parking changes north of Broad Street. However, when you're thinking about any considerations that you might have or any concerns that you might have, those issues can be raised at a public hearing before the Board of Aldermen if it's necessary to make any changes to on-street parking in those other neighborhoods.
Well, only because if you now say folks can open businesses that require more parking in these red areas, you know, on the south side, it's probably not as bad, especially because where the palace is and the history center and all that. But on the north side, on the east side and the north side, there's all residential areas around that, and people will go park in those residential areas.
Don't they already?
In some cases, they do,
Yes.
but more for special events than just regular business.
Special events are everywhere.
And, you know, in the town that I lived in California, they created enough businesses around the residential area where we live that we created permit parking areas around those businesses so that the residents had a place to park. Because not a lot of these historic homes in these areas have garages or driveways.
So in that area, there's
On the street.
180 parking spaces, just.
Which area?
There's 180 parking spaces in that.
Red?
The
North of Pollock,
north of Pollock, south of Broad Street, there's 180 spaces there. I didn't count these, which are the riverfront apartments. There's 40 spaces in there, which are tied to the apartments, so they're not going to change it. So,
but even, I mean, these spaces above Pollock Street, like the Pollock Street City parking lot, they're talking about turning that into kiosk parking, right?
yes, there's discussion on it.
It hasn't happened yet, but.
So what if you guys came back to us at the next meeting with some language that we could then vote on? I don't know if it's possible to work that out before the meeting,
We'll
or,
propose language, and you always have the opportunity to modify it before we pass it on.
Yeah.
We can, well, if we'll
So if
bring
you
some
get- so-
language as a starting point for conversation, we can change it up.
During the
Or
meeting.
leave it at the meeting. Yep, it doesn't have to go packaged just like that. I would caution you, it's not this board's responsibility to debate permitted parking or paying for
Right.
parking. We are charged with our permanent building land use and how to permit them
Right.
and their uses.
Right, but if you're talking about changing parking in one area that could affect parking outside that area, why can't that be considered?
It can be. I think
Just
parking
not-
on the street is accommodated by the Public Works Department, not planning and development services. It's kind of just a different function of government. So a permitted parking situation would be something to be talked about with administration and through the Public Works Department.
we could also recommend this to the board, and they could also vote it down. That
No, I
happens-
understand.
That happens often.
Well, and I'm a little concerned, what I'm hearing is, well, we're just going to draft language and we're going to shape it up so we can give it off to the Board of Aldermen and approve this. I'm not ready to do that. Now, maybe the rest of you are, and I get voted down, and that's okay. But I'm not ready to do that. I think this still requires some discussion. And I'm not necessarily all just pro-business. We're going to do whatever it takes to help with the businesses in town, because the residents, you know, we spend a lot of money on our houses in the historic district.
No.
We want to make sure we preserve that
The way
value.
I see it, the language that they want to propose is something that we can work from. I don't think that it's going to be cut and dry.
But no, I totally understand that and agree. Totally understand that. But I'm not, I guess my point is, I'm not really ready to say, okay, well, let's get some language together that we can say we're going to do this.
No,
Well,
let's get
that's
some
where we can
language
do it.
together that we can work from.
Well,
I guess.
let's do this. Let's get some language for the next meeting, and we don't have to vote on it. We could table it to the next meeting if we don't get a concurrence. But I think we need to start somewhere, and I don't think we need to wait 18 months. If the whole
I
board,
agree, we don't need to.
if the whole
wait
board
18
wants, if we want to have a vote, and we take it from there. But I think there is more discussion to be had. But I think at this point we've exhausted tonight's discussion, unless I'm overruled on that.
Do you think it requires a separate ad hoc committee to look at this and then, I mean?
For this,
I don't think so. I think that. if you
I
look at-
think the work's better done as a full board, right here in the meeting.
I would agree.
perhaps there.
It's not a complicated issue, what we're talking about. It has some potential consequences, one of which we're talking about is pushing parking out, that I think we can talk about, when we have the language in front of us. But, I mean, I don't think this is a complicated thing that we're talking about here.
Well, then I guess I would ask staff, if you guys are going to put together language, please think about some of the things that have been raised, which is pushing parking into residential areas, et cetera. Where are those people going to go? And how do we address that to help protect the residents?
So is there consensus among the members present to have staff bring back some draft language for you during your August meeting for your consideration?
I
agree.
believe so. Yeah.
I would say yes.
Okay. I'm seeing at least 4 heads shake yes, so that's a consensus.
This is a start.
All right. With that, we're going to move on to item number 4, staff updates.
Included a copy of the worksheet for you all, the consistency statement worksheet. We've already sort of been through that in application here throughout the meeting. That's all that I've got.
Okay. Thank you, Seth. Item number 5, board member comments. Does anybody have any comments?
Bring the coat next time.
I think I said enough already.
All right. Trying to think if I want to make a comment on the parking thing quickly. It could be something that the Board of Aldermen could spin off and have a broader discussion of broader downtown. There was one.
Oh, I can assure you they will,
And so-
once we send them some language.
Yeah, this is not a limited issue. This has been an issue in our downtown for as long as I've lived here,
I'm aware.
37 years now.
I've talked to some folks that were on the parking committee with you
Yes.
the last time, and so I'm aware.
Okay. All right, and with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? We are adjourned.